Well, so tell me a little bit more about the African Finance Corporation, what you do and what you're working on.
Yeah, well, the Africa Finance Corporation, we were started in 2007 as a multilateral organization, really to try and catalyze investment in infrastructure and heavy industries across Africa. It was felt at the time that although there was improvement in the economic management of various African countries and in the business environment, that this hadn't translated into investment, particularly in those sectors. So we started out, we were initially capitalized with $1 billion, which was all African money. We sort of had created a team which we poached from some of the best institutions. I actually joined a bit later in 2007. The organization had been around for about a year and a half. We focus on 5 main areas, so natural resources, oil, gas, mining, power, telecoms, transportation, and heavy industry. And within those, we provide investments. We can do debt investments, equity investments, and other things like mezzanine. We also provide advisory services. So some of the projects that we've supported include a company called Cabiolica, which is Africa's first commercial wind farm project in Cape Verde. We also supported a project called the Konan-Bédié Bridge in Côte d'Ivoire, which recently was awarded the best project finance deal in Africa by Project Finance magazine. We financed a fiber optic cable that runs down the west coast of Africa. We also have financed a cement company that's Kenyan but operates throughout East Africa. And we've done a toll road project in South Africa.
So you're continent-wide?
Yes, we're continent-wide. Overall, we have investments in about 11 or 12 different countries, and we're looking at things in probably about 20 or so countries.
Interesting. Very, and I'm assuming those are the sectors that you see as having the greatest promise, at least in the short term.
Yeah, our mandate was really to work on infrastructure. We've expanded the definition of infrastructure a little bit from maybe the core of infrastructure, but if you look at it, there's sort of value chain effects on the sectors we've chosen. They're all sort of interrelated in some way. The sectors were chosen partly due to our mandate, and partly due to looking at a matrix where we looked at what can bring the largest developmental impact and also a good financial return. And one of the sort of unique things about us as a multilateral is that we actually have a private sector majority in our shareholding. And so we have to be quite commercial about what we do. So the return potential is important, but also as I mentioned, the developmental impact. And we felt that those 5 areas could marry those 2 dimensions. But there are other areas, so for example, obviously agribusiness is highly developmental and is a huge part of most economies in sub-Saharan Africa. If you're looking at commercial returns, then things that affect the growing African middle class and the growing consumer class would also be good areas to look at. But those are just not within our mandate, so we don't really focus on those.
So obviously you believe that one can get a financial return while still doing good things in terms of catalyzing development and spurring growth.
Certainly, for an organization like ours, which is sort of based on private sector investment, I think you actually have to get a return when you're making the investments, because no matter how much of a positive impact a commercial operation may provide, if it goes out of business in a few years' time, then its developmental impact actually is 0 or could even be negative.
Right.
So obviously, if you're talking about more donor-funded type of developmental impact, that's different. But for the private sector, commercial types of things where we look at, that's actually extremely important for sustainability.
I think the West is awakening finally to some of the opportunities to do just what you've said in Africa. What do you see as the challenges, biggest challenges for investors as they look to do business in Africa? What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think that there are two types of challenges, or maybe three. So one is around perceptions of Africa. And I think that many investors' perceptions of Africa are somewhat distorted. And now I'm not here to say that, investing in Africa is always a bed of roses and it's fantastic. But I often find...
Nor is investing anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. But I often find that, the issues that people have are not necessarily the real issues, and then they ignore the real issues. And so what do I mean by this? So for example, a lot of people are focused on, things that they hear in the press, so, violence, corruption, etc., etc. Now those are not, I'm not saying those are not problems, but actually I think that they're often exaggerated in terms of their problems. I think also because investors, coming to Africa are coming looking at it as a high-risk kind of environment. They're often looking for returns that they feel are commensurate with the risks as they see them. But they forget that there's also already a marketplace of people who work on Africa and maybe see the risks differently. And so, therefore, the returns they may want are actually not often available because there actually is competition for those investments. On the other hand, I think they often tend to maybe neglect some of the basics. They'll sort of look for maybe some kind of government guarantee or something like that to give them comfort. But it's always very important to look at the underlying economics of the situation, because if the economics aren't working, even if you have a government guarantee, there's a strong incentive for the government not to honor that guarantee. The other thing which is related to that is very often Western companies, and not just Western, but foreign companies, go and negotiate concession agreements or power purchase agreements or what have you, that are just way too one-sided, perhaps with a government that's sort of not so, can't afford the right advisors or is a bit ignorant. The problem with having agreements that are too one-sided is that, again, later on when the governments figure out that, what's happened, the incentive for them to renege on those agreements is very high. Whereas if they're more even-handed, then their incentives, to stick to them are higher. So those are some of the things I think people need to think about.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, you've been a member of IGD's Frontier Leaders really since the get-go, and obviously we're grateful. So tell me, why are you active within the Initiative for Global Development, and in particular part of our Power Working Group? What brings you to that?
Yeah, well, in terms of the IGD and the global leaders, I think it's a very useful forum. As I've said many times in the past, firstly it's useful to have a forum to meet U.S. companies that have some initial interest in Africa, and then they can sort of get more educated about it. And we've certainly seen one or two companies that through what they've learned in the forum have either increased what they're doing in Africa or changed what they're doing in Africa, or adopted a different strategy, which has been very important. But the other thing that I find very useful about it is that it's also a forum to bring African business leaders together from across the continent. As mentioned, we in AFC work, Pan-African, but very often we tend to focus on, the regions in which we live and what have you. So having that kind of networking opportunity, if you like, I also find is very, very useful. In terms of power, power is a major problem throughout Africa. I think virtually every country in Africa, if not at least sub-Saharan Africa, has a power deficit. It seems to take over 5 years, and if you do the average, probably significantly over 5 years, for each independent power project in Africa to sort of get developed to the point where it starts being constructed. And I feel that there's a lot of reinventing the wheel and over-engineering that's involved, which makes these things take so long. So I think that if the power group can come up with some ideas that can help on this in this area and make things move more smoothly and more quickly, then that could have a very useful impact across the whole of the continent.
I think you just captured our reason for being. That's the work we're trying to do. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us, and I look forward to hearing from you tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.